Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my November wrap-up. So in November I read 7 books, and in general I think it was a pretty decent reading month. I had a lot of 3 to 4 star reads and only 1 DNF. I only got to 1 TBR Clear Out Project book this month, which means I'm gonna have to read the last 2 in December to finish by the end of the year. But the book that I got for November was The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell, and I'm going to put up a picture because my camera hates blue things. But this is a very historical fiction leaning Arthurian retelling that is being told from the perspective of essentially a side character. We're not following any of the recognizable main characters from Arthurian legend, but the character that we're following, I think his name is Derfel, and he is very much like a peripheral character who is seeing and interacting with all of these, you know, legendary characters that we know from Arthurian legend. And this one, unfortunately for me, was a DNF. However, it's not a DNF where I think it was like a terrible book. It just really wasn't for me. There were a lot of things that just were not working for me, and I was like, I am not going to put myself into a reading slump at the end of the year for this book. So we'll start with some of the things that I did like about it. I liked the writing. I think that the writing itself in this was really solid. I liked the concept of following this side character and seeing these legendary characters from a different perspective and following someone who's like not at the center of the action. So conceptually, I loved that idea. I liked the approach it was taking to Arthur's character as more of a very human but charismatic leader, as opposed to this like noble and perfect legendary figure. I also thought that the approach to magic in this was kind of interesting. Some of the things that were not working for me, the writing, while I thought the writing itself was solid, there is an incredible amount of description in this book in a way that for me, it doesn't really set the scene or the tone or like the atmosphere of it. It's just like listing stuff where, you know, Derfel would walk into a room and be like, there were 3 tables. Let me describe every single item on each individual table. And it just was too much for me. I think overall as a story, this was much more focused on kind of the broad events and not as interested in like getting into the characters as I personally like. As a character, Derfel, as I said, I loved the concept of him. I did not enjoy him as a character to follow. This character truly lives an unexamined life. Like, not a thought in his head of trying to like self-reflect or reflect on other people. He was constantly like baffled and bewildered by the motivations and the actions of people around him. But it's also like, yeah, people's actions are gonna seem totally wild and out of left field if you don't try to like understand them and have no like reflection on them. And that's just not a type of character that I find interesting to follow. I am really most interested in characters' internal worlds. I love a self-reflective character, and I just found him very uninteresting to follow as a person. And I gotta say, I have the physical book. I read part of it physically, and then I switched over to audiobook because there was so much description that I was like, this is gonna like just land better for me in audio. And the audiobook was pretty solid, except the way that they pronounced Nimue's name, which I was trying to Google, like, how do you pronounce this? Because the person reading the audiobook was pronouncing it Nimue, and it was driving me crazy because I have never once heard somebody pronounce Nimue as Nimue, and I was trying to like Google how do you pronounce this, and there are multiple pronunciations. Not a one of them was Nimue, and I don't know, that just annoyed me every time that he said it. So ultimately, it just wasn't one that was going to be for me, and that's okay. You know, I was hoping to love it, of course, but really I just wanted to give it a try because it is an Arthurian retelling that so many people reference and love and talk about, and I wanted to at least give it a shot, and it just didn't land for me. So on to the books that I did complete. The first book that I finished in November was Shady Hollow by Juno Black. This is the first book in like a cozy mystery series that is all about woodland creatures. So they're these very like anthropomorphic woodland creatures solving mysteries. Our main character is a fox who works on the paper, when suddenly one day a toad is murdered and they have to find out who did it. And so the fox is like trying to get her story for the paper and is trying to hunt down the killer, and unearthing secrets and stuff in people's lives. And you know, the big business tycoon is what is it, Mr. Von Badgerpelt or something like that. And there is the bookstore owner is a raven named Lenore, and it's the Nevermore bookstore, and it just is like a very cute just very cute story, and I surprisingly had a good time with this. I listened to this as an audiobook, got it from my library, and what was surprising to me about enjoying it is just that honestly I don't really read a lot of mysteries. I'm not really a mysteries person, but this one I just thought was so fun. I think that just the cuteness of it I really enjoyed, and I think what I liked about it is that it is very much about the characters, which I think maybe that's one of the things that doesn't always work for me about mysteries, is that the story is so much about the mystery, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm reading a mystery, but I'm not here for the mystery. I'm still here only for the characters. So I think this one had a good balance for me. And it was just, you know, a pretty short audiobook, so also it didn't drag out the mystery too long. It was just a lot of fun. This one, I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars. I would continue on with the series, except that my library doesn't have the rest of the audiobooks. There are 6 books in the series so far. I don't know if there are more coming, but my library has book 1 and book 6 and none of the ones in the middle, which is weird. I don't understand that. And my interest or investment in this series is kind of at the point where it's like, I'm interested enough that if my library had more of the audiobooks, I would for sure listen to them, but I am not interested enough that I would like buy the rest of the series. The next book that I read in November was Hazelthornne by C.G. Drews. C.G. Drews wrote Don't Let the Forest In, which I read last year. It was one of my favorite books of the year, so I was very excited for her new release. This is another YA horror, like botanical body horror standalone, which I, again, also not usually a big horror person, but I do like botanical body horror, and I have liked a book from this author before, so I was excited to get into this one. But this one is following Evander, who has been cloistered away in his room in this like huge manor under the supervision of his guardian. His parents died years ago, and so he has a guardian who's this like older man who has this kind of generational wealth in this huge manor, and Evander has grown up being very sick very often, and so he's kind of kept away from the world and away from everybody in this room. When one day his guardian suddenly mysteriously dies, and all of his relatives kind of descend upon this manor, and Evander is in this situation where he is trying to figure out who or what killed the guardian, while also kind of defending himself against these relatives. And his only possible ally is the grandson of the now dead guardian, who he has a very difficult and complicated backstory with. And so we are following him as all of this is going on, and then also they are uncovering secrets about the family, about the manor, about the creepy garden outside, and stuff starts getting weird. As always, I do really enjoy C.G. Drew's writing. It is very intense and immersive and beautiful and like descriptive, and has that great balance for botanical body horror that is both very like beautiful and a little bit disgusting at the same time. It has this very like visceral quality to it that I really enjoyed. To some extent, I did feel like the emotions were so high throughout the entire book that like tonally it didn't really have anywhere to go. Like the events of the story do escalate and do get weirder as time goes on, but tonally, in terms of like the writing and the emotions, it felt like we kind of started up here, and so there wasn't really like a lot of space for it to go to intensify in like the tone. However, I also think that that could have been that could be intentional, if she wanted to kind of maintain this like feeling of intensity throughout the entire book. That's also possible. I think for me, I prefer an emotional build as opposed to kind of capping out early and then just like staying at this heightened state the entire time. But that's a personal preference. There is also a queer romance in this, which I really liked. I think there were maybe some elements of there were a couple things that felt like maybe loose ends that kind of got forgotten in the focus on kind of the mystery and the horror that was going on. And it wasn't something that like would, you know, ruin the book for me, but there were a couple of things where I was like, I feel like maybe we should talk about this, and kind of like tie up this little loose end. But overall, I did have a really good time with this, and I will continue to read things from this author, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I read Ladies' Night by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. I have read things from Megan Spooner before, but I have never read from Amy Kaufman. So it was interesting to read this like collaboration between the two of them. And this is yet another 2025 Lady Night book. This one is a little more on the lighthearted side. It is very like fun, and there are things about it that are kind of intentionally anachronistic, which I thought was fun. Like sometimes I am very particular about like, this is too, like the language is too modern for this like medieval setting or something, but this one I felt had a kind of intentionality to the anachronisms in it, and it was intended to be a kind of lighter tone, and so the vibe of it reminded me more of something like A Knight's Tale, where it's like intentionally blending the two instead of being something that like pulls me out of the story. I listened to this as an audiobook, which I also thought was very fun. And I guess I didn't really describe what this is about, but in this we are following 2 main characters. Our probably kind of main character is Gwen. She is the daughter of a blacksmith, but she has really taken on the family business and is a blacksmith herself, which means she also has made herself a sword and armor because she wants to be a knight and wants to prove herself. And there just so happens to be a tournament happening, which she wants to enter to prove her skills and her worthiness. At the same time, Lady Isabel is the ward of the nobleman who's putting on this tournament, and her hand in marriage is going to be the prize for whoever wins this tournament, which she is not too pleased about. And so when she discovers that Gwen is disguising herself as Gawain and is entering the tournament, she hatches a plan that Gwen will win the tournament and save her from having to marry whoever else, whatever man like wins this. And so the two of them start working together and trying to cover up that Gawain is really Gwen in disguise, and along the way they have a romance, and it is just a very like fun book. I had a really good time. I enjoyed the romance in this, and I also enjoyed that this is a sapphic romance that is not so like insta love. I feel like very often sapphic romances just jump so quickly into insta love, and I'm like, I just want a little more build up, you know? And this one does have some build up as you know, as they're getting closer, as they're figuring things out and figuring out their feelings and all of this. And I enjoyed the characters, and I enjoyed that they had this kind of build to their relationship. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as slow burn, but at least it was not insta-love. So that was very fun, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I read Fate's Bane by C.L. Clarke. This is a standalone novella, which also has a sapphic romance in it, but I picked this up because it is kind of a Celtic-inspired setting, and in this we're following Agnir, who is both a ward and hostage to kind of keep the peace between 2 warring clans. And while she is there, she kind of is growing up living amongst this, like, you know, other clan. It's kind of all she knows, but she also is always kept at arm's length, kind of on the outskirts, because she is not truly a part of their clan, and she is more so a hostage. And along the way, she falls in love with the daughter of the chief of this clan. And then of course things happen that pull them apart, and, you know, loyalties and their love are tested. This one, I liked things about it. I liked the setting, I liked the concept, and at times I really liked the writing, but I think overall I just never felt fully immersed in this. I think for a book that is very much focused on the characters and their relationships, I just didn't feel like we got deep enough into them. I felt like I was very much told how these characters were feeling and not really shown. There were some very, like, emotionally complex situations for them that I don't feel like we really got enough insight into for my liking. Obviously it's a novella, so there's only so deep you can go, but I do think that for the story it was telling, I think that it needed to be longer. I think that it needed to have the space and the time to dive more into the emotions and experiences of these characters and more of their kind of internal feelings, as opposed to just telling us how they were feeling about things. I didn't feel like I really got to know them that closely. So then when it creates these very, like, emotional moments, I just didn't feel invested in those emotions. So I gave this one 3 stars. I thought it was fine. I would read something else from this author potentially in the future. After that, I read The Summer War by Naomi Novik. This is her most recent release that is very much a fairy tale about a world that is always at war with the Summer Lands, which is where the Fae live. And her father has made a name for himself and, you know, gained lands and property and you know, notoriety in this unending war. But when her oldest brother, who she is very close with, leaves home, she, under the circumstances, she feels betrayed and accidentally curses him. And so then this is following her as she is trying to figure out how to undo this curse, and kind of ends up in hot water. But this book, I actually started reading this maybe a month ago or something. I don't know. I started reading it physically and I just wasn't really getting into it, especially because so much of it was sort of, it felt very fairy tale like, and it was kind of telling us the backstory of the war and how the father, you know, won his notoriety and all of these lands and all of this to like set the context of it. But it just had so much distance that I was like, I don't know if I care about this that much. So I put this down, and then like a month later I was cooking and I wanted something to listen to, and I was able to get the audiobook for this. And so I was listening to it, and then as an audiobook I really enjoyed it. And I think that it's because it has that very fairy tale feel, and so it just works so much better for me being told to me. It feels like a story that's meant to be, you know, told in the oral tradition. And it just worked. And I had so much fun with this. I really enjoyed the kind of fairy tale feeling. I liked the writing. You know, I've always enjoyed Naomi Novik's writing. I liked that it was so focused on, you know, sibling relationships. I think there were some interesting conversations about what it means to care about somebody and how people set up their lives. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. And this also kind of made me think, you know, I wonder if I would have enjoyed Fate's Bane more if I had read that as an audiobook. I don't think there is an audiobook for it. If they ever make an audiobook, maybe I will reread it and give it another shot, because I do think that I might like it more if I listen to it instead of physically reading it. My battery died, so I had to change it, but the next book that I read was The Orphans of Raspay by Lois McMaster Bujold. I'm just holding this up as one of the books in the series because I don't have a physical copy of this book, but this is part of my chronological reread of the Penric and Desdemona series. But as always, we are following Penric and his demon Desdemona as they are having adventures. In this case, they are on a ship that is attacked by pirates, and they are taken as prisoners along with 2 little girls who were you know, on their way to finding their father after their mother died. And so we're following Penric as he is trying to get him and Desdemona and these 2 little girls out of the situation and save them. And this one, I had fun as always with this series, but this wasn't my favorite in the series. I gave this one 3.5 stars. And then the last book that I read in November was The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. This was my most anticipated release, at least for the second half of the year. This is another Lady Night book, hence my excitement for it. Also, I enjoy Alex E. Harrow's writing, and this is sort of kind of a reimagining of her short story, The 6 Deaths of the Saint, which I loved when I read it last year, was it? I'm not sure when I read that, but it was fantastic, and I think that this is exactly the kind of story that her writing is best suited to. So I have been so excited for this, and I did really enjoy it. I am kind of conflicted what my rating for this will be, but I should probably actually talk about what this book is about. So in this, we are following our main character really is a scholar named Owen Mallory. He lives in the country of Dominion that has this you know, centuries old mythos around the tragedy of Una Everlasting. She was a knight who did great knightly deeds and was treated as though she was saintly, but then she ultimately dies in her story. He has always been fascinated with her story and her character. In his scholarship, he studies her stories, and then one day he receives a mysterious book that, you know, purports to be the kind of original document of her story, and that leads him on a unlikely adventure where he ends up being sent back in time to meet Una Everlasting and to ensure that her myth goes as it is meant to go, to create the mythos for their future. This one, I am a little unsure what my exact rating for this will be, but I really enjoyed it. There are a lot of things that I think worked really well in this, and I think it is very well done. There's nothing that I disliked about this, but there are times where I felt like I wasn't fully immersed or invested in it, but there's also so much that was so good. The writing in this is so good. Alex E. Harrow's writing is beautiful without being overdone. I think she manages to write things in a way that is so beautiful the way she puts them, and yet is not just trying to use big words for the sake of as a crutch to sound fancier. I think she writes with such clarity, and that is the thing that is so fantastic about it. The characterization in this is so clear. There are so many moments that I underlined because I was like, this is such a fantastic moment of characterization where like in one sentence I know who this character is. And I just thought the writing itself throughout this was fantastic. I think the themes in this are fantastic as well and is really the highlight and strength of this book. I think it is a very pointed parable about nationalism and propaganda, the way that history is sanitized and manipulated for whose benefit. It is about the nature of cowardice versus heroism. And, you know, loyalty and responsibility and choice, and the way that giving up our choices can feel like freedom but ultimately create greater chains for us. About the way that love creates responsibility and can change our choices. I think that ultimately it is a story about the power of stories and storytelling. In some ways it is a book about books, which I enjoy, but it is a story about the power of storytelling, and yet I think that this one pulls off that type of story much more effectively than many others that I have seen. One of the things that I also enjoyed about like the characterization in this was both so clear and it was also consistent. Not that the characters didn't change. I think seeing the way that the characters change and grow throughout this and their perspectives change was really interesting for both of our main characters of Una and Owen. They both have some really interesting changes. I think that Owen, especially his perception of cowardice and national identity and his perception and relationship with his father changes so much throughout the book, and I thought that was so interesting. So there are a lot of things that I just really loved about this. You know, there wasn't anything that I disliked, but I was not consistently like invested or engaged with this. I don't know if I was like fully invested in their romantic relationship. I don't feel like the romance really added to it for me, and I also felt like it didn't fully sell me on the romance and chemistry of these two characters. And as I said, there were like parts of the story that I was like fully invested, and then there were parts of the story where I was kind of dragging and just like wasn't like, I liked what it was doing, but I just was not fully invested in it. So I don't feel like I can give it 5 stars. When I first finished it, I gave it 4 stars, but then as I have thought about it more, like this book is really stuck with me, I think because it is very thematically rich. And so as I have sat with it and thought about it and I've talked to people about it, and when I try to explain it to people, I just feel like it really stuck with me, and I think that there's so much that's so great about it that I'm like, maybe I'll land at like a 4.5 stars for this because there's so much that's so good. So those are all the books that I read in November. How is your November reading? Please let me know in the comments. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!